LRBT2, Flaw, question 9. So we've got a pretty lengthy stimulus here, so we're probably going to want to read that first before we even go on. And so they're asking us, how does our author weaken the argument for the claim that aggressiveness is innate to human beings? So from this, we can tell that we've got two speakers here. We've got whoever's making this claim that aggressiveness is innate, and we have somebody else weakening the claim. And so weakening the argument, like if we are going to weaken an argument, we're going to, you know, we're exploiting a flaw. So that is why this is a flaw question. A little weird, but hey, we're gonna go with it. So we have a researcher in the first sentence that claims that human beings are innately aggressive. So since we read that question first, we can tell, okay, we're going to weaken it. So we're going to think, what's wrong with this argument? As evidence for this argument that human beings are innately aggressive, our researcher goes ahead and, talks about warfare in history. And then it says they discount any current disinclination to fight. So that says, okay, apparently we're not trying to fight right now, but they're looking at the past and saying, okay, we fought before. There's been a lot of wars. Okay. And they're going to give us this quote. And so that, like, they've kind of explained to us, if we kept reading and read the quote and we didn't really get it, that second sentence was going to help us out with context. If we're somebody who doesn't do so well with the framework and we didn't understand that explanation as evidence, blah blah blah, current disinclination to fight, we could have read the quote to figure out what was going on there. So we got tripped up. It's okay. So the quote here that tells us, how are they looking at history, and they're saying today we're peaceful. The most peaceable peoples of today were often ravagers of yesteryear, yesteryear, and will probably fight again in the future. So basically, even if we're peaceful today, these same peoples have gone in previous generations and fought a bunch of people, and they will probably fight people, sometime in the future. That's that quote that the researcher is citing to support their claim that human beings are innately aggressive. So now at some point we're going to weaken this because that's what our author is trying to do. We don't know who our author is, but they're here to weaken this argument. So they say, but if some peoples are peaceful now, then aggression itself cannot be coded in our genes. Fair enough. Only the potential for it, only the potential to be aggressive. So it's like our author is pointing out that our researcher is assuming that since, like, if we're going to say human beings are innately aggressive, just because people have done it before, even if they're peaceful now, like they've done it before, to say that they are going to be aggressive, like our researcher is taking it as a given. But our author is saying, it just means that it's possible. It's not a given, it's just potential. And then they go on and say, if innate only means possible or even likely in certain environments, then everything we do is innate and the word has no meaning. So they're basically like, they're distinguishing. Our researcher says, like, pretty much this is a given, but our author is putting some nuance in there and saying, okay, innate only means possible. And then they're like, okay, like if everything is possible, then the word innate has no meaning. Okay. So they're basically just kind of like twisting it this a little bit, just so when we know, okay, it's not necessarily given, it's just possible. So our researcher needs to calm down. It's also worth noting here that we have the author is building their argument by saying, hey, aggression cannot be coded in our genes. Only potential. So they're distinguishing, like, human beings are innately aggressive, like coding in our genes. Don't really know what exactly that plays in here. But our researcher is saying, like, okay, like if we're innately aggressive, like that's passed down. Peoples of today were ravagers of yesterday, will probably fight it again in the future. They're like, there's an idea of this being passed down. But our author is saying, hey, yeah, it can't be coded. It's just like we can code the potential. Like we're not coding the aggression. And so then they're going ahead and saying, like, okay, like innate only means possible. So they're really trying to break us out of this line of thinking here. And they're going ahead and saying, like, everything is possible. Everything is likely in certain environments. Everything we do is innate. So what's the point of saying that something is coded by genetics? Because like everything we do then is innate. Everything is possible. So the word has no meaning. They're basically explaining why we can't code something in our genetics. It's a little hard to get. Okay. So let's go through these answer choices and see like what do we like, what do we not like? A, the accuracy of the historical data cited in the argument for innate aggressiveness is called into question. So we have two criteria that we meet when we're doing flaw questions. That first one is that it needs to actually happen in the stimulus. We're not calling into question the accuracy of the historical data. They're not saying, hey, this quote actually was misquoted, you know. So the first criteria isn't even met here. But the second criteria is, does it hurt our argument? This would hurt our argument in a way, if the researcher had gotten it wrong, or if there's something else about the historical accuracy. B, the force of the concept of innateness used in the argument for innate aggressiveness is called into question. So basically, this force of the concept of innateness is like the strength of it. And I guess that kind of happens a little bit. We're not necessarily like, I think there's a difference between the researcher saying, hey, this is pretty much a given, and our author saying it's just possible. But this, like, innately aggressive, like just arguing over how important this is not really going to hurt the argument. It's not. They are trying to say like, okay, great, aggressiveness is innate, and then they're playing with the word innate. But how our author is arguing here is really thinking about like, okay, we can't code this thing in our genes, just the potential. We code the innateness, and if everything is innate, then nothing has meaning with respect to that word. So we're not quite doing this, but B is a really strong wrong answer. C, an attempt is made to undermine the argument for innate aggressiveness by arguing that there are no genetically based traits. So this is what they're trying to do here. They're saying, hey, aggression itself cannot be coded in our genes, only potential. Everything is potential. So we can conclude if this were a most strongly supported must be true question, we could say, okay, we can conclude that if everything is possible, you can only code the potential for things rather than the actual act itself. Everything we do is innate. We can get from that there are no genetically based traits, just the potential for things. So and I love that they put attempt, because I think some people would say, that wasn't really strong. I would probably agree here. It's not the most satisfying argument, but hey, we'll take it. So this meets our requirements of, it actually does happen in the passage that there is an attempt being made to undermine the argument in this way. And it would hurt the argument, if we can't have genetically based traits. D, an attempt is made to undermine the argument for innate aggressiveness by suggesting that it appeals to emotional considerations rather than to reason. So we don't actually talk about emotional considerations here. That would be something like, this researcher isn't using anything factual or anything in terms of solid reasoning. They're just trying to appeal to your emotions and make you sad and buy the puppy, like Sarah McLachlan plays in the background or something. They're trying to get you based off of your emotion, but not on solid reasoning. We don't actually do this here. So D is not going to be our answer. And E, an attempt is made to undermine the argument for innate aggressiveness by arguing that all peoples are peaceable. We don't argue that all peoples are peaceable. Well, they actually agree. Like if they agree on the premise that people are going to be peaceable. The researcher is saying the most peaceable peoples of today. So that probably indicates that there's some relative quality between different groups. Just because something is more peaceable than another doesn't mean that they're necessarily peaceable. And let's keep in mind of that. That's a flaw. That subjective, relative, objective, whatever. Flaw. That's a flaw. And then on our author, I think if some people are peaceable now, so neither of them are talking about all peoples being peaceable. So that doesn't happen in our argument. Even if it did, it would not harm our argument. They would say, oh, all peoples are peaceable. The researcher's point would still stand that people could fight again in the future. So C is going to be their best answer here because it actually does what's happening in the stimulus, and that would actually hurt our argument. So yeah, C is our best answer.